Hello and welcome back to my channel. I feel like it has been so long. I was down in the United States of Texas and then I got sick and then I threw my back out and then my reading schedule got off. I, there's just been a lot going on. But we have finally come to the end of another month, so I thought it would be nice to do a little wrap up of everything I read in the month of February. I think for this video, I'm going to start with my least favorite and work to my most. In terms of physical books, I think I read like one, two, three, four, five, six physical books. And then this month, I started on my audiobook journey to mixed results. Yeah. So, and I have some interesting thoughts and feelings about audiobooks that I would love for us to chat about. So let's start with the physical books that I read, starting with my least favorite, which the internet lied to me. It's I Have Never Known Men. Or I Who Have Never Known Men, excuse me. Everybody on that little clock app was really obsessed with this book. It's a dystopian fiction that imagines a world where, at least as we first see it, it's these 40 women that are held captive in this cage. And something happens, like an alarm, I think, goes off, and the guards who are keeping watch over them flee, and these women are able to escape, and they find their way to Earth, right? Outside of their capture, they're captured underground, I think. And so they find their way up onto land. And it's unclear whether or not it's Earth. It's unclear whether or not it's another planet. I feel like as you go further, it doesn't necessarily feel like Earth, but who could say? It just didn't land for me. I feel like a book like this should be asking questions or should be opening up ideas and concepts that inspire the reader to ask questions. And I just don't feel like I had any. I don't feel like it offered up enough thought-provoking engagement to really make me want to understand what was going on and why we would have gotten to that place in the world. And. So yeah, I mean, do I think it was bad? No, but I don't think it was worth all the hype, and I don't understand the hype. I don't know if people felt smarter in reading it, which is kind of annoying, you know what I mean, from love. I don't know. I also feel like there were some opportunities for us to have those moments. There were certain things, especially towards the end, I feel like the protagonist was exposed to certain things that could have, had we been given even two more sentences, we would have gotten maybe something, a little bit of a clue or a little bit of a hint or something that might have even engendered us to this to figuring out these holes or these mysteries, I should say. They're not holes, but these mysteries within the story, and it just didn't do that. Also, I feel like the plot, before anything would happen, before any there would be a sag. And I just don't know if we need a sag. And you could argue that the author was employing a technique that mirrored the landscape that the women were encountering. But I think that because there was so much else missing from it, I think that that's giving a little too much credit to the author, respectfully. It just felt like it came, we needed to ride out some sort of plot point until there was a lull, and then it was a little bit boring, and then something else could potentially happen. And it was just why are we sagging? What is what? It added to the lack of effectiveness for me. So listen, I just don't think it's worth your time. I think that there's other dystopian fiction or other speculative fiction that are better. And in fact, we're going to talk about one here, but also Prophet's Song that won the Booker. Paul Lynch, I think, wrote it. That's great dystopian fiction. Go read that. That's excellent. And then we'll talk about speculative fiction a little later in the video. Next, I read White Nights by Dostoevsky. And listen, I think, to quote Taylor Swift, it's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me, because I didn't put two and two together. I really solidly felt like the internet sold this book to me as a love story. And I had a huge viral moment on the Clock app, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, White Nights, White Nights, White Nights. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna treat myself. It's short. I'll read it for Valentine's Day. What a lovely little treat. Well, ignorant, not thinking, oh, hi, this is Dostoevsky. It's not going to be some happy love story. I just like fully wallowed in my own self-pity. I think it's a great book. I think it's interesting. I do think that like certain things are slightly implausible. I was talking to a friend about it, and he was like, the male in this book is like crazy town USA, and like it feels totally implausible, and like all of these like problems with the plot, and like he's not wrong, but I think if you suspend your disbelief, like I did enjoy it. But the protagonist, I think, yeah, he was like so relatable in the most devastating way. And just like, oh, yes, I can relate to being friend zoned. Oh, yes, I can relate to being the one who's not chosen. Like, and like that was not a fun way to spend Valentine's Day. Like, I have a mirror. I don't need to read the book to have that. You know what I mean? I can go look in the mirror and know all of those things that this book just exposed to me. I don't need to read it too. But all that said, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think it's worth your time. I think it's fascinating the way social media works and how this book is getting this like fresh breath of life. And I, in fact, may not have even read the translation that everyone was obsessed with. I don't think I did, in fact, because I couldn't get a hold of of a copy of that translation. Like I think that it was sold out everywhere, and the publishing house was like not ready to keep up with the demand because like at this point in time, like who, you know what I mean? Like White Nights, a random like short novel by Dostoevsky, like why would they have just like, you know, massive amounts of copies sitting around? So yeah, again, so I think worth your time, but just like very much not what I felt like I was promised. And here's the speculative fiction that I was talking about. So, like, if you want to read I Who Have Never Known Men, but you've not read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, this to me is what you should pick up instead. I think it was an excellent work. I really enjoyed myself. I think that there's one before this, and I know that there's one after this. Octavia Butler writes in like series. There's a more elegant word for that, or eloquent word for that I don't have right now. But like she always talked about that it was like she rarely wrote standalone works. So I mean, I don't know if I have the mental fortitude right now to dive into the one that comes before this, and I don't know if I have the mental fortitude to dive into the one that comes after, because that's the one I think that has the politician that is similar to kind of what's happening in our current times. So we'll see. It's fascinating. Octavia Butler, a lot of folks talk about her as this prophet, and she always insisted that she was not a prophet, that instead she just used data to inform her speculative fiction. And that is inspiring and frightening. Right. So I really went into this trying to think about it not from an emotional lens, because it really focuses a lot on a lot of the fires that were happening in California, which felt very akin to what we saw recently earlier this year. And so I went in trying to think like, okay, how can we like steel ourselves emotionally and really see like what data points was she seeing, and where can we like find similarities and warnings in this, right? And take from that into our current times and maybe make different choices and decisions. One of the biggest things that I took away from this work actually was the idea of community. And I do think we're starting to talk about that more on social media, and talking about like during these turbulent times, like how community is really at the forefront of success and survival. And so I think that is key moving forward, and really begs the question, how do we create community and fortify it amongst these turbulent times? So I'm intrigued and excited to start to build that in my own space and life. I also thought that her narrative style was very interesting. It felt, someone described it to me, a friend of mine, as surgical. And I do think that her prose is quite surgical. I also felt that there was something that almost felt kind of like an arm's length between the reader and what's happening, or the reader and the protagonist. And I took it one step deeper, and it made me wonder if part of the reason for that was to give us another view into the experience of being a Black woman in America. And I say that because this main character was what they call, oh, I forgot the word for it, but she's like a feeler. She's like this hyper empath. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't remember what that is. She's this like, so she feels things greatly. So even physically, right? So like if someone were to be hit, like she would feel that. And so it's fascinating to me that you have this character who's feeling, or who has this like hyper empathy, that in the book is seen as this negative, as this like vulnerable trait that's going to make her undesirable to her community. And yet we also have this like arm's length telling of the story. And it made me feel like it made me wonder, right? Like, is that part of the experience of being a Black woman in this country, and really having like an unfair burden to bear that I feel like this country has put on Black women specifically. And then how do they have to navigate that? And how are they expected to show up in space, right? And how are they expected to like to lead and put an arm's length and show stoicism and pull it all together and save us, as they've been asked to do too many times, and then also ignore this like deep empathy and this deep caring and this like, all you could argue like this like large cultural element that is in like the fabric of their being, and the juxtaposition of those two in order to like lead. And I just, that is what was really powerful for me about this. It's it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I really did. Again, I mean, I do think it sagged a little bit towards the end, but I think if we consider that she wrote in like multiple books to tell a story, I think you could push back and say that maybe it didn't sag in the larger scheme of things, right? Because you're gonna need some push and pull if you're thinking about this as like a 3+ book story, right? So I think that there could, as an argument to be made as a standalone work, that it sagged a little bit towards the middle. But I think if you think of it collectively, I would push back and say that it was probably intentional and necessary. Another quick little warning from this is, and I understand the trust of the law enforcement is at an all-time low, but the privatization of the law force within this book was frightening to me, especially with everything that we have going on. Like, that to me feels like something worth keeping a very close eye on. They needed to pay to have the police come and do anything. And again, I understand that trust is not there, and there's a whole larger conversation that needs to be had. But the privatization of services like that to me was something that needs to be kept a keen eye towards, because like, what? And also, like, aren't we paying for it already? Anyways, so loved Parable of the Sower. I do think it takes a bit of stealing of the nerves, but I think it's totally worth it. Oh, and then I read Junie. Listen, first of all, quick little soapbox. It is Insanity the Musical to me that Good Morning America was the only one of those big book clubs that chose a Black author for February. Insanity the Musical. Insanity the Musical. And if the problem is that there weren't Black authors being published during that month, also Insanity the Musical. And I cannot imagine that these large book clubs do not have close relationships with these publishing companies. So I don't understand how that's the world that we're living in right now. But that might be a whole other video and a whole other conversation that needs to be had. You know what I mean? But Junie was excellent. It was Good Morning America's book club pick for February. I like thoroughly enjoyed myself. It is set in 1860 in Alabama, and the protagonist is an enslaved girl. And it is about her story and her struggles and her navigating through the complexities of her life. In the author's note, the Erin does an incredible job of talking about how she wanted to create a work that obviously included the horrors of 1860 Alabama, but that really focused on the humanity of the characters and had that be the forefront of the story, which it was. And I thought that she did a really excellent job of that. I also do not think that she skirted the horrors of 1860 Alabama. And I think that those are very prevalent, and it was absolutely the foundation of kind of all of the choices that were being made, right? But I think that the primary focus of the story was about the human connection and the human relationships. I mean, love stories, they're coming out the wazoo. And I mean, straight, maybe some others, right? Little surprises here and there. I enjoyed myself. I think it was really well written. I immediately, when I read it, I could start to feel like the deep humidity from Alabama. I just thought that she wrote, which is one of my new favorite things, and one of the things I'm going to be talking about, I think, all year, is when the author uses literary devices, structures, syntax, verbiage that directly correlate and ladder to the story that they're trying to tell, which is what she did. It was so readable and so consumable. And I think for a book like this and the story that she was trying to tell specifically, it needed to be like, it was not overly ornate. It was not overly written. It was like a perfect blend of these are the words that I'm choosing. This is the syntax that I'm choosing because this is what matches the story that I'm telling. And I loved it. I will say I was first slightly trepidatious about this one because there's a ghost story element. And I was like, not really my jam slash vibe. And like, I was also like, it's 1860s Alabama. Like, there's a lot to cover as it is. Do we need to put the ghost on top of it? But it's handled so well. So if you have heard about this book and that is what was causing you a little bit of don't. It's handled so well. It's not the only focus of the book. I would say it's woven throughout. So it's definitely like a thrust of it, but it is not like where we spend most of our time, or where I would argue that like we're directed to focus. Does that make sense? Like I don't let that be a deterrent to you. And also I just think the pacing was so great. The first half she spent um all this great energy like engendering us to the protagonist, really setting the scene, doing a lot of nice world building. We understood the characters. She really sprinkled in, some nice hints or some nice like setup for the plot that was going to take place later. And then the second half, y'all, it was like plot point on plot point on plot point. Like every time I turned around, something was happening. But again, in a way that felt believable, and in a way that felt consumable, and in a way that made me excited. It was a great ride. It was just such a good time. Yeah, I think it's absolutely worth a read. I'm trying to think. I loved it. It's great. And then I finally made time to read Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. This was a fantastic work. It won like everything when it came out, because I'm like way late to the party. It won the National Book Award. It won the Pulitzer. It was like and everyone's obsessed. And there's an Amazon like mini series. I need to watch that. Which a mini series, like maybe mini series from like the 90s that I remember, where it's like 10 parts, and I think almost every episode is like an hour or something like that. So like it's like a mini series of the days of yore, you know what I mean? Like meaty. I will say I think that the first half was absolute high art, no notes, incredible. Then we get to the second half. And again, I think that having healthy conversations about art is what keeps art vibrant and what keeps our brains fresh and thinking, right? Like once art is put out into the world, it grows and it has a life and it evolves in terms of like public perception versus like, how we're reading it, and how me reading it now versus when it first came out. Like, I mean, the world has changed so much, right? So I just want to put the caveat there that like this is not some sort of condemnation of this piece of art. Instead, it's just like a dynamic, vibrant conversation for us to have, because I think that is how art stays alive and continues to evolve as it should, right? So in the second half, Whitehead I should say the book is set up, broken up into sections, and the sections are either named by the location in which the section is about, or individual characters. And when he takes us to Tennessee, I believe it is. I just want to double check. Yeah, right after halfway through, he takes us to Tennessee. And I think he starts to employ his kind of like herky jerky, stop, start, kind of disjointed storytelling a little bit in a way that just felt us out of place from the first half of the book, right? Now, the same way that I think I was giving too much credit to I Who Have Never Known Men, I do think here it is very possible that he was employing that storytelling technique because of what was happening plot-wise, right? It was a lot, the protagonist like doesn't quite know what's going on. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of watching your back. There's a lot of like, what's going to happen next? Where am I going to go? What is life? What did that? So in that way, like I could get behind that, right? Like that, while it wasn't as smooth and as like art to me as it felt like the first half was, I could still understand why. You know what I mean? But then he took us to Indiana and he slammed on the brakes of the narrative style so hard that it was hard for me to buy in. And again, you could make an argument it's because of where she was in life and where she was from a plot perspective and where she was like geographically, and life just felt a lot slower and a lot more peaceful. And again, I could get on board with that. However, the ending was explosive. And I feel like to go from breaks on to explosive, he didn't tie, there weren't enough ties there to make it work for me. I feel like pumping the brakes that extremely undercut the explosive ending, especially even the way, because he did such a great job of immersing us in this slower narrative style and this like way that he was telling the story, right? And in doing that, it like would speak to things more casually. And so he's speaking to the ending in this really casual way that worked and was very true to the narrative style that he'd employed for Indiana, but undercut the ending. And so for that, it just kind of bummed me out. But that's it. Otherwise, I mean, but it's still art. Like, should you read it? Duh. I mean, and maybe you all, maybe you all have already, because I know I'm way late to the party, but like, it's an incredible book. This is, again, this is like, because it's so good, and then we can have cool, nitpicky conversations about it, right? But like, read it. It's just those two things I would have liked to see a little bit different. And then you could make an argument that if I bought into the reason why he did Tennessee, then my only real reason is the Indiana piece, which, like, okay, great. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's incredible. Go read it. I will say, I do think after reading several of his books, I do think The Nickel Boys is like his like top of the game. So yeah, absolutely. And my favorite physical book that I read this month was Harriet Tubman Live in Concert by Bob the Drag Queen. Listen, it comes out March 25th, by the way. Go pre-order your copy. I went in knowing I was going to like it, just because like I like Bob and I like Bob's brain and I like their art. And I just think that I was like coming in like prepped to like it, but I loved it. That was where I was surprised. Like, it's brilliant. And I hope he writes another book. Like, this was so good. And it's a wackadoo storytelling, right? In terms of like, the concept is this, like all of these people from the past have like been somehow implanted into modern day. And he doesn't really explain it. And I think by the end, I know why, and like, cool. So like I that was the only thing where I was like, what? But I easily got past it because the rest of it is so good. It is about being Black and being queer, and begs the question, like, what is freedom, and how do we find freedom in our lives, and what are we doing to pursue the freedom as we have defined it for ourselves. And it's just, I love it. It just really moved me. And I mean, I laughed out loud. I cried. It was just, I really did. I had such an incredible time with this work, and I cannot recommend it higher. I mean, and listen, it's a story about a man who is writing a I think rap, like writing songs for Harriet Tubman to perform in this like concert that she's going to be doing that culminates at the very end, and like that is a wackadoo premise, but it works. He delivers on it, I think, very successfully. I think it's great. I read because the reason I feel like I'm being slightly like cagey in terms of giving away any more details is that like you should go read it for yourself. I think that this is one that like it's an experience that you need to have versus me telling you little plot points because you might be like, because I mean even that like what Harriet Tubman like rapping, like what like that might turn you off from it, and like it shouldn't. I think they were raps, yeah, like a hip hop album. It's great. It's great. Now on to my audiobook exploration. Okay. I've gone back and forth with audiobooks, namely because I don't know what you're supposed to be doing while you're audiobooking, like while you're listening to it, right? So a friend of mine was like, well, I like, she like knits or crochets or something like that. And I was like, love that for you. And that's a great use of your time, right? If you're going to be knitting and crocheting, like reading it, like listening to an audiobook, live, laugh, love. I don't do those things. And I, from love, don't have interest in doing them. So I was like, okay, great. So what do I do? So I decided to listen to them at the gym. And I was like, can I do this? Like, let's experiment because, like, am I going to be able to count my reps and listen to what's happening here and, like, retain all of this, both for my workout and for the audiobook? Like, unclear. Because sometimes I read between sets and, like, I've, like, timed, like, roughly how many minutes it takes me to get through a page versus how many minutes I need to be resting. So, like, I'm able to do it that way. But I also, but you know, I haven't done that while I'm lifting or while I'm counting reps. So I was like, can I do that? And I tried first with Iron Flame. And I will say I learned multiple things. Iron Flame, I was able to count my reps. I did enjoy being told a story, like while I was working out and like at the gym. Did not love Iron Flame the audiobook. The narrator for me, a little wild and crazy. She felt like respectfully, because people may love it, right? But respectfully, it felt like a try-hard theater kid in a way, like derogatory. You know what I'm saying? Like it didn't land. I thought the voices were cheesy. I thought the cadence and all of that just like did not work for me. I will say the fight scenes when you like speed up the audio, oh my gosh, those are exciting. So like that really worked for me because it was like super exciting. I felt like really engaged with the fight scenes and what was happening in the plot. Like just great. The sex scenes were wildly awkward to listen to, and that's not normally my jam. Like normally that's like would never bother me, but like, and I couldn't tell if it was the narrator or the writing, potentially both, because also if she employed the word CLIT one more time, and listen, that word does not offend me in any way. Like, great, let's talk about it. Let's learn about it. Let's like, educate the world on it. But like, it just felt very jarring having that read to you, and also in the way that it was written. So like, so Iron Flame, fine. I do feel like had I read the physical copy, I would have hated it more than I did listening to it. I think I was able to, as a listening experience, kind of excuse some of the shortcomings of the writing. So that's agnostic of the listening experience. But so yeah, so fine. And then I tried something else. I was like, all right, let's keep it light, brain candy. Like, what about, I was like, everyone on the internet is talking about The Housemaid. And I see it in like all these bookstores, like shoved at me in the front. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'll listen to The Housemaid because I've been back and forth about wanting to read it. I liked the narrator better. Okay. I enjoyed the audiobook experience more. That book is not well written. That book is not good. Is not good. I, I mean, all of that said, I guess in my own, like to argue with myself, like I was vaguely intrigued to like listen to the second one. But that said, the third audiobook that I listened to was not the second one. So that also says something else, right? Um, yeah, not a great book. Fine plot, like interesting, adjacent. I don't know. Again, another experience that I'm glad I listened to because I think I would have hated it even more if I had read the physical copy. You know what I'm saying? But we're getting better, liking the narrator better. The third and final audiobook that I listened to, and the last book that I engaged with this month, was the first book in A Court of Thorns and Roses. Listen, I had a good time. I liked that narrator. I do feel like the writing was slightly too much. Like it was like overwritten a little bit in the beginning, a little too ornate. I feel like, again, for the story that we were telling. Also, from Deep Love and Affection, we all know that like the story for the first book is Beauty and the Beast plus Puccini's Turandot, right? Like that. And I understand like authors all leverage plots that already exist. That's fine. But like it's Beauty and the Beast. Ah, it's Beauty and the Beast. It's Beauty and the Beast. And then Turandot. Great. Had a good enough time. But like, so I asked some friends and like I do think that the other books like employ some like new stories and some like different evolution of that. So like I'm excited for that. And full disclosure, I started the second one. I forget what it's called. The teal cover. Audiobook. Started it yesterday at the gym. So like, you know, enjoying it enough. And I like the lore. I loved the world building. I loved the fairiness of it. And those scenes, especially this one at the beginning of the second book, y'all. I mean, obviously we'll talk about that one later, but like that is how you write a scene. You know what I mean? I feel like the Fourth Wing series, like that is a little extreme. This to me is like, oh, this is sexy. It was, yeah, into it. So yeah, I liked it, and I liked the narrator better. Again, slightly too ornate, and like that made it a little bit of an interesting reading, like listening experience. Because when it gets ornate like that, and you're trying to do something else, that made my brain a little bit like it was a little bit harder for me to focus, which is interesting, and kind of goes back to I think where I've landed with audiobooks is brain candy adjacent stuff or like things that are more like plot driven I can do. I don't know if for me I will have the same experience if I read like literary or listen to literary fiction. Yeah. So again, each to their own. I have a great friend who texts me all the time about audiobooks she's listening to, and most of it's literary fiction, and she loves it. So like, great, go with God. I think she also does a lot of driving too. So like that could be part of it. It's a different experience, right? When I'm trying to like count reps and like my brain's trying to do other things at the same time. So it could just be a me thing. But I also, there's something about the literary fiction space that I want to engage with the language in a different way. And like the physical experience of it is a little bit different for me. So yeah, that's I think where I've landed with audiobooks. I will continue on this journey because again, I've enjoyed having a book like something read to me, which is also an interesting thing. I think there's a fascinating debate to be had around like reading a book because like reading these physical books feels like a different experience to me than listening to an audiobook. But we're also in the middle, of this like giant literary crisis. So like I don't think that like I'm not in the camp of like nose in the air against audiobooks. Like I don't who does that serving? Like what are you get over yourself. But I think it's an interesting discussion because it does feel like a different experience. And have I read the book? Sure. But that feels like an interesting distinction. Is it necessary? I don't know. Probably not. Because again, like, who cares? Like, live your life. If all you do is listen to audiobooks and like, because then you say you're not a reader, like that seems insane to me. So yeah, I think it's worth leaving that conversation open, and I think it's an interesting, vibrant conversation as long as everyone's coming to the table with like an open mind and an open, like, expanse for the different answers to that question. The last book I wanted to talk about was The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. So I am starting on a journey through this year of reading all the top 10 of the New York Times top 10 books of the 21st century. The list is 100, but I'm going to read the top 10 this year. And so this was the book that I wanted to talk about for the month of February. I've made many videos on this book. I also think I talked about this book and Isabel Wilkerson specifically in my Black History Month video. She is a national treasure. This book is about the Great Migration. I don't think we talk about this enough in this country, across the world, the way that this period of time shaped most of the major cities in the North and it also in the West and shaped the fabric of our country. And you can really look to a lot of certain decisions that are being made to these choices that these individuals made. It's just fascinating. It's so well researched. I think this is truly like her opus. Also cast. I mean, the thing is, like, every the thing she comes out with is better researched than the one before and like more profound and like she's just, I cannot speak highly enough of Isabel Wilkerson. So this is about, again, the Great Migration. It tracks specifically three families, one going to Chicago, one going to New York, and then one going to the West Coast. It is incredible. It is incredible. It's so well researched. It's presented as narrative nonfiction. It feels like you're being told these incredible stories. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. And I think it's absolutely worth your time. I also feel like I think it's number 2 on the New York Times list, and like deservedly so. So yeah, let's go back through these. Warmth of Other Suns, absolutely worth your time. A Court of Thorns and Roses, sure. I think if you're into that, get into it. Housemaid, I think you can leave it on the shelf. Iron Flame, I think you can leave it on the shelf. To the point that like I don't even know if I'm going to read the third one, and I've read the first one and I've listened to the second one, and I'm like, I don't even know if I want to listen to the third one. I'm so sorry. Harriet Tubman live in concert, of course. Hello, yes. Pre-order your copy now. It comes out March 25th. The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. If you've not already read it, hello, of course you should pick that up. Yes, yes, yes. Junie, yes, hello. Read it now, especially too to support Good Morning America's book club in making the correct choice for February. Loved it. Parable of the Sower, I do think it's necessary. I think if you read it from an information gathering place, and I think if you have steeled yourself for some of the complexities of that story, which is also true for Junie and for the Underground Railroad, actually, and for Harriet Tubman, I think that you need to kind of really put yourself at the right spot because all of them handle really difficult subject matter. But yes, Parable of the Sower, if you're in that space. Dostoevsky, White Nights, yeah, I would say I enjoyed it. It's not a love story. Don't trust me. It's not a love story. And then I Who Have Never Known Men, y'all, no. If you want speculative fiction, read Parable of the Sower, or if you want this dystopian fiction, read the winner of the Booker, Prophet Song, Paul Lynch. Yeah. All right. This was so much fun. I cannot wait to talk more books later in the week.